Well, this morning we're wrapping up our Guardrails series. I think it's been a great series from a lot of the feedback I've been getting from many of you, and seems to have been helpful. So we're going to wrap this up today, really talking about having these guardrails once and for all, because we need. And so, well, before I get into it a little bit, but just a reminder what guardrails are. Let's read this definition of guardrails together. A guardrail, a standard of personal behavior that becomes a matter of conscience. And we've been talking about where the guardrails need to go, not in the areas that we're going to get in trouble or in danger, but before the areas of danger and trouble. We also talked about how they need to be firmly established. We're going to talk a little bit more about that today. And also that we don't want to put them on wheels. We don't want them move. They're supposed to be immovable, if that makes any sense. And that's that matter of conscience part. So we're going to continue looking at guardrails. And there are a couple things, even as we end this sermon series, the tension around these desires doesn't go away, does it? I mean, we can preach, we could keep preaching about it all year, but just because the sermon series ends doesn't mean the tension is going away. The temptations aren't going away. We're going to get up tomorrow, next week, they're still going to be there. Those tensions are going to be there. Those temptations are still going to be there. Those desires within us are still going to be there. And the reality is, I don't know if you think this way. I think many of us think this way and feel this way at times. We think things like, I don't want to give generously to others. I want to spend generously on myself. I don't want to work on a difficult marriage. I want a new one. I don't want to study. I just want a good grade. I don't want discipline. I want fun. I don't want to be a role model. I just want to be happy. I don't want to be healthy. I want to eat stuff that tastes good. I don't want to do good. I just want to feel good. And that's that tension, isn't it? Between what our head says, what we know to be right, that right action, and yet what we want to do, or what we feel, or what our emotions are telling us, or our desires are telling us. And that tension's not going away for any of us. It's not going away tomorrow. It's going to be there next week. It's going to be there next month. It's going to be there next year. It's not going away. So we have to think about that. The other thing about this, these tensions is, and one of the things we've been talking about in this Guardrail series, is that if we give in to the tension, it doesn't make the tension go away. We think I'll just give in this time, or I'll just make this compromise this time. But actually what happens is if we give into the tension once, it actually becomes easier the next time, and the next time. I talked with, last week we talked a little bit about physical intimacy, and one of the things I talked about was extramarital relationships. And I've actually talked with people in that situation, and I've had this conversation more than once, but I'll share a particular incident with you. There was a couple, and the wife had met a guy at the gym, and she decided she was going to leave her husband and go have this relationship with this guy that she met at the gym, because he was just so much better than her husband, and things were just so much better in this relationship than her marriage relationship, and she just thought this was going to be the greatest thing since sliced bread for her. And so she was now saying, I made a mistake, in my first, marrying this guy. Now, I knew both of them pretty well. I knew the husband. There was no abuse going on here. He was a nice guy, very respectful guy, and I couldn't understand what was happening. But anyway, she had decided she was going to pursue this other relationship. And I remember talking to her, and I just was real honest with her, and I've actually had this conversation with multiple people, and it's the same every time I have it. But I said to her, this isn't going to work out. What do you mean it's not going to work out? Of course it's going to work out. It's so much better. I'm telling you, it's not going to work out. And the other thing is, I think one day you're going to wake up and you're going to realize you made a mistake. So I told her two things. I told her, one, it's a mistake. You're going to realize one day this is a mistake. And number two, you're also going to realize that it's not going to work. It's not going to work out. So, and of course, what I got back was, I don't need you. I don't need your advice. I know what I'm doing. I've got it figured out. But everything in my training and everything in my experience, even at that point in time years ago, was telling me this is not going to work. And I've had this conversation with more than one person, and I've had the same response from each person. And here's what happened, because I still keep in touch with her first husband. She got married to this next guy, and then they ended up divorced because she found another guy. And then she got married to that guy, and then they got divorced for some reason. And then she ended up, so this is now 15 years have gone by, And I find out that she picks up the phone one day and calls her first husband and says, I made a mistake. Now, I wanted to say, I told you so. But you can't do that, and that's, and at that point, he had gone on, married somebody else, had kids, started a family, so all that happened. And so there was no getting back together at that point, and there was no reason for that to happen. But the point is that once we make that, the problem with those relationships, when we chase after a relationship like that, is that when we cross that line, it just becomes easier to cross the line again and cross the line again. It doesn't make it harder. It actually makes it easier. And the other thing is the foundation of that relationship is built upon a lie, basically. So if you're building a relationship with somebody on a lack of commitment or a lack of honoring the commitment with somebody else, what's to say you won't do that again, or that relationship, and so you always have that in your mind in that relationship. The foundation of that relationship is not built on a solid foundation. The point being is that if we compromise, it just gets easier to compromise and easier to compromise and easier to compromise, and that's how guardrails move. And guardrails don't move like this fast. It's just incremental, a little bit at a time, a little bit here, a little bit there. And so we have to be aware of that these tensions aren't going away, and if we compromise these tensions, it's just going to get easier to compromise the next time. The other thing about these desires and these temptations is that they'll never be fully satisfied. And that's what we're chasing after sometimes, isn't it? Is we want that full satisfaction. We're chasing after something that we'll never be able to fully satisfy. Like the Ecclesiastes said, it's like a chasing after the wind. And so whatever that desire is, we can keep pursuing it and giving into it and chasing it, but it'll never fully be satisfied in any of these areas, in finances, in relationships, in friendships, in food. I mean, think about it. You taste that double fudge brownie, chocolate syrup, whipped cream all over sundae after that big meal, and you have it, and it was good, and you're stuffed, and for that moment, you're satisfied, aren't you? You feel good. You're satisfied in that moment for that day. But 2 days later, what are you thinking about? Oh, man, I could really go for another one of those double fudge. You see what I'm saying? That is never going away. That desire is not going away. That will never be fully satisfied in our desires in this life. I think one day in the next life we will be content, and we'll know what true contentment is and be free from those temptations and desires, but those will never be fully satisfied. So we're chasing after the wind, so to speak. So what can we learn from Daniel? Daniel can help us today. Now, Daniel and his 3 friends, which, by the way, did great job reading all those names, and never underestimate you guys. I mean, these guys are professionals. I don't care what Parker said. These guys are professionals. So don't let anybody underestimate you because you're young. And in fact, Daniel was a young man when he went into the Royal Academy. And his friends were young men. And so what the king in Babylon was doing was he's taking these young men, the best and brightest from all the different nations that they had conquered, and bringing them into this royal academy to train them up to serve him, to serve as their officials. So that was pretty smart leadership move on his part. He wanted to get the right people, the best people in the right seats in his kingdom, because that would help his kingdom and help him in his ruling. So he wanted the best. And so he was calling the best from every nation into this royal academy and training them in literature, language, and religion, and all kinds of things. So this was this royal academy that was also indoctrinating them into the way of Babylon. And in fact, when the names were changed, their names were changed. We don't see this in the text, but their names all represented something about Yahweh. And when the king changed their names, it was all to names that had to do with the Babylonian gods. And so that name change was an indoctrination process, part of the indoctrination process that they were going through. So they get these names, and they're going into this royal academy, and then all of a sudden they find out they're going to get fed from the king's table. Now, you'd think this was a good thing, right? I mean, we're talking everybody else is eating scraps, but here we get to eat the king's food. We get to get the T-bone steaks, the lobsters, all the good stuff. But, oh, wait a second. Lobsters aren't on the Hebrew menu, is it? There were dietary restrictions that they were to honor their God with what they ate, and they were to be obedient and honor God with what they put in their body. And so there were restrictions on what they could eat, so lobster was off the menu. Not that I don't think the king of Babylon was serving lobster, but you get the idea. but he was probably serving some of the best food off of his table. And he was serving the double fudge brownie chocolate sundaes, you know? Who doesn't want that? So there's that. But the other thing that was going on for Daniel and his friends was that the food was also, the meat from the king's table was meat that had been sacrificed to idols. So for them it was ceremonially, religiously unclean. And the wine that was coming from the king's table was wine that was offered in libation to the gods of Babylon. And so they had this internal dilemma. They had this tension, and they were wrestling with, what do we do? You know, do we eat this food? It looks really good. Or do we not compromise on this? Do we stick to our faith? Do we stick to our God? And so they had to question that. They had to wrestle with that. And even though the text doesn't give us it, I think that they wrestled with it. I think they were just like you and I. They had this tension, and they had to figure it out. And then in verse 8, we see we find out what happens. In verse 8 of chapter 1, it says, "But Daniel resolved that he would not defile himself with the royal rations of food and wine." Now, the key word here is resolved. He resolved himself to this because he saw this as defiling himself, not just God, but defiling himself in this way. And so he had resolved this within him. Now, when that Hebrew word resolve means is that his head and his heart were in alignment. His head and his heart were determined in the same direction. Now, what happens to us? Isn't it that our head says one thing and our heart says another, right? You know, we know what is the good thing to do, the right thing to do, the right action. We know what the right action is, but our heart's saying, no, I want to do this. Let's go this way. And it's that division within us between our head and heart that keeps us from being resolved. And so when it says he's resolved, it's saying his head and his heart were in alignment. And that's what's happening, is he brought his head and his heart into alignment on this matter. And that's what happens to us. When we're really resolved, that's what's happening. Our head and heart are in the same direction. Now, I had asked a question, and I don't know if you're asked a question, how did Daniel get his heart to go with his head? That's a good question. I think it's because Daniel loved God more than he loved the other stuff. It was his love for God, his heart for God, that helped bring his heart into alignment with his head. So his desire to please God trumped his desire for these other things. Does that make sense? And that is how God actually helps us have firm guardrails, is that when we love God and we desire to please God more than other people or even ourselves, that we can then bring our heart into alignment with our head and resolve as well, like Daniel did, to bring those two things into alignment and not struggle with them as much. And so he realized that. The other thing that Daniel did was he realized that he could trust God if he did this. Because a lot of times some of this is a faith issue too, because we want what we want now because we're afraid that we might not get it later or get what we need later. And so what we're doing is we're not trusting for our needs to be met and fulfilled in the future, and so we think we got to get it now, and that's that instant gratification piece. So do we trust God with our future? Because that's what Daniel was doing. He was not only, because he didn't know what was going to happen, right? When he made that decision, he didn't know whether he was going to die, if somebody was going to be killed for this, if he was going to be kicked out of the Royal Academy, if he was going to be picked on by his classmates. How come you get the special treatment from the guard? He didn't know how his master was going to be treated as a result of this in the end. He didn't know the outcome, but he was trusting God for the outcome. He was trusting God with this guardrail that he had put in place in his life. And that's the thing about guardrails. What we maybe don't understand in the here and now is that by keeping guardrails, it does direct our future outcome. It does direct what happens to us as we go through life in the future. A good example of this actually is a story I heard from my dad. I heard this story so many times, I could probably verbatim lecture it back to you. Do you ever have those stories from your parents that you've heard more than once, maybe 5 times, maybe 10 times, maybe 15 times? You're like, I know the story. You don't have to tell me again. Or some of us parents, we have the story, right? We keep telling them, right? You remember the story? So When I was a young guy, I was sixth grade. In my I wanted a motorbike. I wanted a dirt bike, like a Yamaha Kawasaki dirt bike to ride around. My friend had a Yamaha, another friend had a three-wheeler, another friend had a four-wheeler, and they would go riding out on the dirt roads and the back roads and the woods and everything. And I wanted to ride with them. And so I came to my dad and I would say, Dad, I want to buy this motorbike. I'll save up my money. I'll work hard. I'll do whatever it is. I get this motorbike. And every time I'd go, I don't know how many times I asked him, but every time I'd ask him, he would the same response. No. And then I get the story. This is the story he would tell me. He said, I was in college and I was studying for my exam. And as I was studying for my exam, one of my friends, college buddies, rode up on his motorcycle to my house, knocked on the door and said, hey, come, let's go ride. Let's go out and have some fun tonight, and let's go riding. And my dad said, well, he's like, now he's got this tension going on. I really need to study for this exam, or I can go have fun with my friend. And I really wanted to go have fun, and I knew it would be great if we went out and hung out together and went riding out in the evening. And it was a great night, beautiful night to go out riding. And wouldn't it be great to go out with my friend? And so he had this desire to go, but he also knew that he needed to study. And he wrestled with it for a little bit, and then he finally said, I need to study. I got to, so he stuck with his discipline. And he said, I need to study for this exam I got tomorrow, so I'm going to stay here and study, but go have a great time. His friend left his house that night and was then killed on his motorcycle. Somebody didn't see him as he was going down the road, went right through the intersection, and he was killed. And my dad looks back at that experience and he goes, that could have been me, Matt. And he says, you know how many friends I know who've been injured on motorcycles? He says, I don't want that to happen to you. And so that's why I got no. But the point is, I want you to see something. His choice, his decision to stick to the discipline over desire actually directed his path, didn't it? He may not be here today. And guess who else wouldn't be here today? Right? And that's what he would always point out to me. You wouldn't be here today, Matt. And he just had too many. So those experiences, that wisdom, whatever it is. Now, riding motorcycles is not bad. It's not a sin to go ride a motorcycle. That's not the point at all. The point is that sometimes our decisions to do what seem to be the right thing actually direct and God uses to direct our future. That when we stick to those disciplines, they can actually help us in the future, and they direct our paths. And see, the other thing that we learned from Daniel and his friends is that, which we didn't read today, was Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego later in the book of Daniel are confronted by the king and the leaders because they wouldn't bow down to a golden idol. The king had set up a golden idol in the valley of Durza, 60 cubits by 60 cubits. Now, what's a cubit? Now, a cubit is the length from your elbow to the tip of your finger. So if you can imagine 60 of those across and 60 high, that was the golden image that was set up. And everybody in the kingdom was supposed to bow to this image. And there were three guys, actually four, but three guys that weren't bowing to this image. Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego. And they refused to bow. And they said to the king, hey, we're not going to bow to this idol, and we trust God's going to take care of us if we don't bow. And even if we die, even if we lose our lives with this, we're still not going to bow. And so they say this. And you know what? This is where God rescues them out of the fiery furnace, that story that we may have heard in Sunday school. But my question is, how did them not compromising on the small ceremonial issue of not eating food sacrificed to idols prepare them not to give in to and compromise on the bigger issue of public worship of idols? Does that make sense? So because they didn't compromise in this situation and they saw God take care of them in this situation, how much did that give them confidence to then again in this more public way say no again and have their confidence in God? It created confidence in God, didn't it? As we trust God with the outcomes of our lives, it actually builds trust in the future. And so if compromising weakens us down the road in our resolve, guess what? Not compromising does. It might just give us the confidence to not compromise again. It might just strengthen our resolve in the future. And so it can go either way on this. So remember, guardrails don't move, but incrementally, subtly, unseen ways. And it's those little compromises that lead to bigger compromises. But the other way around is if we don't compromise on little things, it sometimes makes it easier not to compromise on the big things. So it goes both ways. And that's part of resolve and having that resolve. There's a great proverb that helps us out here about resolve and actually about integrity. And Proverbs 11:3 says this, "The integrity of the upright guides them, but the crookedness of the treacherous destroys them." See, what it's saying is integrity will guide our lives. If we keep integrity, if we stay integrity, meaning if our guardrails have integrity, meaning they're not made of plastic or aluminum foil or things that have no integrity, but if our guardrails have integrity, we can trust that they're going to guide us in the good way in life. But if we have no integrity, then we're going to find ourselves in trouble. And life's going to get complicated. And I heard one definition of integrity, that integrity is the ability to subdue our desires to our values. To subdue our desires and our wants to what we know is right and true and good. Our values, what's important. And the ability to do that makes for integrity, to have integrity. So think about that's what it looks like to have integrity, and that actually trusting these guardrails and trusting God can actually help direct, not only protect us, because we've been mostly talking about that, but actually direct our future. A few things to keep in mind as we wrap up, and I'm going to tell a story. Now, one, we can make up our minds by trusting God for the end result. So I hope you got that today. That we can trust God for the end result, the outcome. If we trust God in the here and now, we're trusting God with our future. Number two, to remember compromising only weakens resolve and often complicates things. Number three, God will use our resolve to direct and protect our lives. That's what Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were doing. They were trusting God. They were trusting God with their lives. They were trusting God with the outcomes. They were trusting God with their education. They were trusting God with their finances. They were trusting God with their friends. They were trusting God with their relationships. And they were keeping these guardrails that had integrity. So I was thinking about this, and I thought about this story this week that actually happened last summer when I took my girls, my two daughters, whitewater rafting up at the ASCI Center. On top of WISP, they have a man-made whitewater. It's the only man-made whitewater center on the top of a mountain in the world. That's their claim to fame, whatever. They just didn't build it in the valley. That's why they can say that. But anyway, it's this man-made whitewater rafting center, kayaks and all that stuff. And so we went out with a guide. There's three of us and a guide in our boat. And what's really cool about it is you go through this man-made course. It's actually, what I like about it is it's safer than going out on a natural river because there aren't any hidden dangers under the water. It's been designed in such a way for it to be, everything to work together smoothly rather than chaotically out on the river. So that makes it a little bit safer, not 100% safe, but a little bit safer. And this was the first time my girls were ever going to do this, so I thought this would be a good place to do this. And the other thing about it is that at the end of the run, there's a conveyor belt that takes you back up to the top. You never get out of the boat. It's really cool. You just get over there and you paddle over to the conveyor belt. You sit in your boat, and the conveyor belt takes your boat up to the top of the course and dumps you in again. You go around again. And you just do this all morning long. And we had been out there for about 2 hours, and the guide says to us after we get, before we get on the conveyor belt, "You want to go one more time?" And we're like, "Yeah, let's go one more time." That's always the time, we had been having a great morning. Everything was going well. We had been having a fun time. We had been I swam a few times, that kind of thing, but always got back in the boat. And we were having a great time. We went this one more time, but we were all at this point pretty tired from just being out. It's physical exercise. And so we take one more time, and we were coming down the chute. Very first rap, it's a class 4 on a scale 1 to 5 rapid. So it's a big, what they call a big hydraulic, and you come down into it, and then you're supposed to, come right out of it, and that's what gives you the thrill. And so we get into that first, and we hit down in the bottom of that hydraulic, and I'm like on the side of the raft. My two girls are up here, the guide's in the back, and our raft goes like this, and I can feel the raft, the backside of that guide hit the bottom of the river, the cement at the bottom of the river. And then I can see the water starting to come over the side of the raft. So we got stuck. We stopped. We didn't shoot out. We stopped in the hydraulic. Water's coming in, and then I hear the guide go, "Uh-oh." And so that's when the raft flipped and 4 people go, woo! And we all land in the water and we're scrambling for paddles, and I'm yelling at the girls, get over, just swim to the side, just swim to the side. And we all swim to the side. And so now the 3 girls, the 2 girls and I, 3 of us, are on the side. We're up on the ground with our paddles, and we're watching the guide swim, trying to track down the raft. And he finally catches the raft, and he gets in the raft, and he's now having to fight the current to paddle over to the side of the river where we're at. And so we're walking along, like waiting for him to come over, and we're thinking, is he going to make it? Finally, he makes it over, and he pulls up, and he jumps out of the boat, and he grabs the handles on the side of the raft, and the current's still going. We're outside, and he says, well, you all get in, and so the girls get in, and then I'm about to get in. I have that little moment, where your kind of intuition says something's not right about this. But he says, go ahead and get in. I'm thinking, are you going to be able to hold it? I'm a big guy, and I'm going to get in this raft, and that's going to put more weight in the raft. The current's strong. I had this feeling that as soon as I get in, I'm going to, we're going to be toast. And so, but, what do I know? And so I get in the boat, and sure enough, as soon as my weight gets into the boat, he loses his grip on the raft. And now it's me and my 2 daughters in this current without a guide. And he's like, well, hey, you guys. And I'm like, oh, this isn't good, because we got the rest of this course to go down. So I start digging in with the paddle, and I see the girls dig in, and we get the boat back over to the side. I jump out, girls stay in the boat. I get the boat up on the rock. I'm not leaving it in the water. Get up on the rock. He comes back over, holds the raft again. He says, okay, get in. I was like, no. This is what I said to him. I said, you get in first. Now, why did I do that? Why did I say you get in first? Because I knew we needed him in the boat to get the rest of the way down, right? We needed his expertise. We needed his experience. He knew the course. He knew where the eddies were. He knew where the rapids were. He knew how to navigate the course. We needed him in the boat more than they needed me in the boat, is what I was saying. I said, me with my, we're not going to survive. You will survive, right? So I said, you get in first. And you go, oh, yeah. So he got in, I got in, we made it down perfectly fine, had a great day, right? Here's the point, though. Do we say to God, God, you get in first. You be first in my life. Because I can't make it through this life without you. If I don't have you in my boat, I'm not going to be able to make it with all these rocks and eddies and things and places of danger. If I don't have you to help me with my guardrails, if I don't have you in my life to strengthen me and give me the integrity I need and give me the heart that I need to bring my heart into a line with these things, I am not going to be able to make it on my own. God, I need you to be first in my boat, in my life. My question is, where's God for you? Is God in your boat? In your life? Or is God walking, because I believe God's always with us, right? Or is God walking along the shoreline of our life just watching us, try and navigate it on our own, try and figure things out on our own and wonder why we keep flipping and getting into problems and having trouble? And God's just waiting patiently for us to say, get in the boat, God. Come, get in our boat. Get in my family's boat. Get in my boat with me. I need you in my boat because we can't make it through this life without your guidance. So where's God for you? Where's God in your life? On the shoreline or in your boat? Amen.